All right, here we go again. Welcome to the Otherppl Show. It's a books and culture podcast. I'm Brad Listi, and I'm here in Los Angeles. Happy Sunday. Hope everything is okay out there, as okay as it can be. I appreciate you listening. I'm going to be doing something a little bit new today on the show, and I think it might carry forward. I'm going to be playing an episode from the archives. I'm over 1,000 interviews at this point. It feels like I should be looking back on some of the more memorable ones and sharing them in full. And to be honest with you, after last year when I was doing full brand new interviews a week and reading 2 and 3 books a week, I think I might be overdoing it. So I'm trying to make this manageable for myself is what I'm telling you. And I also want to deliver new episodes or, content that you guys can enjoy. So I'm trying to kind of find a happy median is what I'm saying. And I hope that going back into the archive and highlighting some golden oldies is going to be acceptable. If that happens, it will happen on Sundays. That's what I've decided. So I can't think of a better episode from the archive with which to begin this than episode 616. My conversation with the great Tim O'Brien, which first aired on December 11th, 2019. How is 2019? Well, I guess it's like approaching 7 years ago. Doesn't seem that long ago, but time goes by. Tim O'Brien came to my house. This was back when I was still recording in person. I guess in December of 2019, we would have been on the cusp of COVID. COVID was really when things shifted and podcasting tended to become remote. And I remember Tim smoking cigarettes in my driveway, and he was wearing a baseball hat and a leather bomber jacket, and he was totally unpretentious, and we got along, and we had a great talk, and it has stayed with me. If you haven't heard it yet, you're in for a treat. If you have heard it, it's one of those conversations that's worth revisiting. So Tim O'Brien, for the uninitiated, won the National Book Award for his novel Going After Cacciato. And of course, he is the author of the classic The Things They Carried, which was a Pulitzer Finalist and a New York Times Book of the Century. He's also the author of In the Lake of the Woods, which won the James Fenimore Cooper Prize. And he was awarded the Pritzker Literature Award for lifetime achievement in military writing. I'm very happy to be able to revisit this one and to share it with you right now. Here I am back in December of 2019, episode 616, my conversation with Tim O'Brien.
Because I was 58 years old, and it struck me that when my first child began to know me, he'd know an old man, which is how it panned out. And he may not get to know me at all. Life is fragile. So I decided to now and then, every year, every 2 years, just jot down a page, maybe 2 pages of speech to my boy I may never know and who may never know me. I'd write about incidents with him, but I'd also write about my own dad, and I'd write about Vietnam, about my struggles as a writer, just so he'd know something of what his father cared about, but mostly just to hear the sound of his father's voice coming through the pages of a book. And it wasn't a book really until my younger son, Tad, when he was 7 years old, and saw the stack of pages and said, "Is that a book?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, what if you write more? Will it become a book?" And I said, "Maybe." And very sternly he said, "Well, you have to be honest and call it what it is, a maybe book." And I discarded the idea, kind of chuckled at it, but didn't take it seriously. But when he went to bed that night, it occurred to me that so much of my life has been organized around maybiness. Vietnam, every step was maybe. Maybe I'll have another step, maybe not. my area of operations in Vietnam was heavily mined. Most of our casualties came from landmines. And just walking was terrifying. And then that carried over, almost infected the rest of my life, where everything that came out of my mouth, I could almost immediately find an exception to it or qualify it or amend it. And I had learned to really despise absolutism. That's part of where the maybiness began to tantalize me. That it's not a sin to say, I think, or in my opinion, or maybe. And now in old age, every hour, I feel like I'm back in Vietnam again in a way that you can feel the pressure of finality coming on. And that spurred me to kind of adopt the title of maybiness, but also to begin actually contemplating a real book.
Well, and it's interesting that you say this, that you're having this experience now where, just to be real about it, like actuarially speaking, we don't live forever, and you're up in age, and you're recognizing that in this book. But you also had the very unique experience of being extremely close to death or confronted in a way with your own mortality that most of us don't experience early in your life in Vietnam. And so I guess a question would be, do you sense a distinct difference between your confrontation with mortality in your youth and your confrontation with mortality now? Like, what are the differences?
The biggest difference is now it's pretty much absolute. Back in Vietnam, it was you're young, you're 19, 20, 21 years old. And although you're terrified of maybe the next instant will be the end, in your mind there's the expectation that maybe I'll get lucky. But you don't get lucky in old age. That eventually, it happens to everyone. Finality comes down. And it's what revs up, for me at least, the squeeze and the urgency of wanting to articulate some of the things that I haven't articulated in my other books. I haven't ever written about my pacifist inclinations that grew out of Vietnam. I'm not an absolute pacifist, but I don't think violence accomplishes much in this world and can have terrible consequences. It can kill the innocent while you're pursuing your absolute beliefs that may be changed 2 years later. Once there were weapons of mass destruction, they were absolute, slam dunk. And we found out otherwise, and a bunch of people died. So the squeeze now feels more urgent than it did, 50 years ago in Vietnam. It's not a morbid thought, though, because it does increase for me. It increases the desire to squeeze into time all the love I feel, not just for my kids, but for the world I live in, and for what I've done with my career for all my life, how much I've loved trying to make good books. And in a way, it's a beautiful feeling to have spent the last 17 years concentrating on what wars are supposed to be for. They're supposed to make peace and harmony and concord and civility and decency. And I wanted to write about the opposite of what I'd been writing about for most of my career, about love and civility and being nice to people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very sweet book. And I recognize the sentiment of wanting to leave something behind so that your kids actually know who you are. I sort of feel that way about this show. Just hours and hours of tape of me in conversation when I still have a few of my marbles, and I guess even though the day-to-day interaction, obviously you get to know your kids, especially if you really invest yourself in raising them, but there's always just that unknowability of another human being. And we see, I feel it with my own parents. Like, how well do I really know them?
So that's one of the main things I've learned about being a dad. I can tell an anecdote where I learned the most astonishing thing about my older boy, Timmy. He He was at the time 9, I think, and my younger son was 7. We were vacationing in southern France and at a way too expensive resort, way out of sight. It was just filled with people who looked like George Hamilton and bejeweled and rich. And my wife.
Where was it?
It was Cap Ferrat. It's in the south of France, sort of near Nice, in that area. Very exclusive. We didn't know how expensive it was, but boy, the pizza slice would be like, $30 a slice, and it tastes like duck liver. And I remember $40 for a glass of Coca-Cola. I mean, just ridiculous. And we were all out of place. Everybody looked rich, and I looked like a guy in a sweater and a baseball cap. We just didn't belong there. And one day we were outside, my wife and I having a drink, and kind of complaining about the cost of what we were drinking. And I got a phone call, and it was my sister calling from San Antonio to say that my mom had died. And I remember feeling so Midwestern in France, and my sort of Minnesota roots. So out of place I felt, and so far removed from the mother I'd grown up with in a little turkey town in Minnesota. And I got up and I went over to my boys who were playing ping pong out in the lawn. And I told them my mom had died, and they didn't say much, and I didn't say much. And I can recall for a couple of hours that ping pong ball just going back and forth, much like what was happening in my head. I have memories of my mom as a young woman, and then in a retirement home, and in a swimsuit, or in the Navy, and things like that. And afterward, as dusk came in, we went to dinner. We left this ritzy resort. We walked down a long sloping hill to a town where we could eat more cheaply. And I can recall the purple twilight, kind of just so beautiful, and the silky air. And I reached out and took Timmy's hand and said, Are you thinking about Grandma? And he said, No, I'm thinking about you thinking about Grandma. And it's an example of what you and I were just talking about, how I didn't know my own son. I thought he was in his little boy world and caring about basketball and Rubik's Cubes and whatever kids care about.
Right.
But without that empathy, I didn't know was inside him. I thought it might come in later years, but it was already there. And how he articulated the empathy through a really terrific sentence. It's a simple sentence, but I'm thinking about you, thinking about Grandma. It's got rhythm and those two thinkings. It's really,
yeah.
I didn't have to write it.
Right. Right. It's gold.
It was delivered to me.
Right.
But it's an example of how we, in a way, we're all strangers from one another. We're all locked inside these heads of ours. I can't read your mind and my kid's mind, nor can you read mine. And it echoes kind of how I felt through my whole life, through the Army and through my middle-aged years and now into old age, that I feel slightly estranged from everything around me, because I'm always wondering what do I believe about the world and about people, and ultimately what do I believe about myself? I mean, what do I really believe about myself? And the answer is not a lot. I guess why I do what I do and why I write what I write and where this book came from. But it's guessing.
I don't have a lot of, I was thinking about this just the other day myself. I don't know if I have very many beliefs. And I think I'm glad about that.
I am.
I think beliefs are, anytime I've ever felt a strong sense of conviction, especially when I've expressed it with emotion, mm-hmm. in a fast way, without mm-hmm. really digging in and considering,
yeah.
I always come to regret it.
Me too.
Maybe not massively, but could be something small, and I'll be like,
yeah,
that wasn't me at my best.
Yeah, that's how I feel. You express something only because you feel like you have to offer an statement of conviction about something, but oftentimes it's hasty and it is regretted. You can be saying, did you ever play sports? You say, yeah, I played high school football. And you instantly realize it wasn't high school. It was junior high football. And you lie awake at 2 and why did I say that? Why did it come out of my mouth?
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty common phenomenon.
Well, we have these stories we make up that we might not even share. It's almost like, we construct ourselves from these memories that may or may not even be accurate. Mm-hmm. I sometimes catch myself, talking about who I am through the prism of memory. And I'll be like, after the fact, I'll be like, I don't even know if that's true. Just like what you're saying, you know, like
it is.
Like, I guess maybe we need a shorthand or we need some way to build ourselves that makes sense. But I think it would be nice to be accurate.
It is. I mean, it would be nice, but that was one of the huge difficulties. I'm a fiction writer at most of my career. This is a work of nonfiction. And it required a certain fidelity to what happened, which I thought would be fairly easy, but was really hard. For me, most of my memories are no longer memories. They vanished for me. Vietnam, which was so traumatic and powerful in my life, so frightening, so morally painful, is almost entirely gone. There are a few indelible moments that remain. I mean, it's like watching a little video on YouTube for 20 seconds, maybe less, really, 5 seconds.
Really?
What preceded it and what followed it is gone from memory. And it's true of a great deal of my life. It's actually true of yesterday. I mean, who among us could really recount every word that came out of our mouths yesterday and what we heard on television and how we got from the Safeway to home? You know, you lose it as you go. But we do live with this illusion, as you just said, that we know ourselves. But I'm not sure we entirely do. It's hard to be faithful to yourself if you've forgotten most of your life. And I had the same experience with my father. It's a little episode in the book where I write about sitting with him on a porch at a retirement home when he was 91 or so and didn't have much time left. And we were sneaking cigarettes out on the porch. And I asked him where his medals had gone from World War II. They used to be in the bureau drawer under his socks, and they'd vanished. And he said, medals? Was I in a war? And I said, yeah, you were in Iwo Jima and Okinawa. And he shook his head, and a few seconds went by, more than a few seconds, 50 seconds, almost a minute or so. And he finally said, oh, yeah. Those damn kamikazes, you sailed a war young, naive, and then you sail home, the oldest man on earth. Another great line. But then he said, he was in and out of senile dementia. He was not demented, but he'd have bad moments like that. Then he said, yeah, but that war thing, that was Willie O'Brien. Now I'm Bill O'Brien, which meant that in his youth he was called Willie. Now he's called Bill as an adult. And to him it was as if they were two different people whose lives he'd forgotten the life of the young Willie O'Brien and recalled only the life of the Bill O'Brien. And then he said a great thing that gives me some solace now when I'm getting old is that he said, but getting old isn't all that terrible. You don't worry about the future when there isn't any.
Right?
Isn't that a great line?
Yeah. What a relief.
And it said, so those little moments you can pluck from the real world pretty indelibly and pretty accurately and put in a work of nonfiction. However, I have forgotten how we got onto that porch, what we did afterward. I've forgotten everything else about that entire day, except a few words come out of my dad's mouth.
And how soon after that experience did you write it down? Because it feels like if you jot things down when it's still fresh, you can capture it. But if I let things go, like I was reading not too long ago, somebody talking about memory and how there are certain things you don't forget, like the birth of your children or the first kiss and all these different things. And I started to actually think back, and there are certain memories of the birth of my children. I have certain pictures in my head, but I don't have like a super perfect memory of even that.
I don't either.
I was so panicked. I was probably just like standing there, like trying to pretend like I had my shit together.
Same with me. I can remember, I think I can remember, although I'm not even certain about this, both children coming out of the womb, but I really don't remember. I have a kind of vague, fuzzy feel something happened that was important. The only indelible memory really is one of my sons, the second boy, Tad, was born with a very stubby little small toe in his left foot. And I was taken into a room, and I remember looking at the foot, thinking, oh, God, it was inconsequential. I mean, nothing, just had a little toe.
Right.
But I wonder what the consequences, but I can see that toe. But aside from that, this vaunted, we'll all remember the birth of our children thing doesn't apply to me, and nor does it apply to my wife, really. Right. She doesn't remember much of it either.
Right. Try to block it out.
Yeah. So it's what's germane to our conversation on this, to me, is writing nonfiction is a hard thing to do if you're going to not be deceitful. You can pretend you remember, but to actually be faithful to reality is really very difficult to do, which explains why the book is written as it is, short chapters and usually without a introduction to it, because there isn't any in my memory, and usually with nothing following an incident.
Well, but I like that about it because it reflects the way that I think most people's minds work and their memories work.
I do too.
I find myself, listen, if it's executed well and somebody writes a memoir that feels very linear and full, and it feels like a novelistic telling, it can be a joy to read. But man, that is at odds with the way that I experience my thinking mind.
It feels artificial to me too. I don't really trust linearity. At least it's hard for me to, when I remember things, I'll dart around in time. I'll go back to, playing baseball with my dad, and then I'll go forward to 50 years later of him lying dead, and then I'll go back to middle age when he was a terrible alcoholic and house was full of tension and bitter late night arguments with my mother, and how he was institutionalized twice and didn't have a dad to play baseball with. I jump around in time that way. And my memory is certainly not linear. And to recount something in a way that you don't actually remember, it feels to me duplicitous a little bit. And I'd prefer to write a book that does what my memory does, jumping from spot to spot and time to time, hoping that what coheres, what holds things together, is the theme of lived life. That readers are smart. They can sort out the ages of characters and when things, they can put them along the chain. And but to deliver as best I can the way life has come at me, the book skips around in content too, not just in time, but it'll jump from an essay about the importance of trying to teach the work of Hemingway to my sons as a way of teaching my sons about me and my struggles. I chose Hemingway because his diction and his vocabulary are accessible to 14 and 15-year-olds, the only real reason I chose him. And I chose him also because my dad had once given me 5 of Hemingway's stories. But then it'll jump from kind of writing lessons to talking about being careful about killing people. Careful of absolute. And then it'll jump to a tiny incident in my life which reflects so important to me. One evening, my son and I, Tad, were watching an NBA game on basketball. He was maybe 8 years old, and in the middle of the game, it was a Lakers Celtics game. I'm a Celtics fan, and I was into it. He was into it. But in the middle of this tight, exciting game, he said, "Hey, Dad, that guy in the Bible, Methuselah, how old was he?" I was startled by the question. I said, "I don't know, maybe 1,000 years old." Tad said, "Wow." And then maybe half an hour goes by, and I thought we were all engrossed in the game again. And Tad said, "What exactly did he eat?" The question made me laugh, but 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, after he went to bed, I think I know where that question came from. He realized how old I am. He knew I had gray hair and hearing aids and my actual age. He knew that I was at least a full generation older than the parents of any of his friends. And I think he was, I don't think so, I'm almost 100% certain, because I later asked him, did that come out of your old man father? He said, yeah. And I said, why did you say, what exactly did he eat? And he said, well, if Methuselah lived to be 1,000 years old, I thought maybe he was eating stuff you should eat.
It's like, Dad, you need to go vegan. Come on, man.
What do you do with that? I'm not going to try to analyze the story. Sometimes stories just are themselves, and if you try to explain them or analyze them, you're doing a disservice to your own story.
Well, and I think when you're working in a nonfiction vein and you're trying to have real fidelity to things as they were, little moments like that, and it all, kids are great that way. Like, you'll get these kind of perfectly formed exchanges or scenes, or I can think of a handful that stick with me with my own kids, and you just go, God, that's gold, and they're not even trying,
not even trying.
So, what about growing up in Minnesota? You've alluded to it a little bit, but you grew up in you called it a turkey town.
Yeah, it calls itself a turkey. It calls itself turkey capital of the world. Where they got that information, I have no idea. I think they largely invented it. Yeah, it was a small town of 9,000, southern Minnesota, near the Iowa-South Dakota border. Flat soybean corn country, some turkeys out on the farms. And it was a place that, as a little boy, I both loved and feared. I loved it for safety and baseball and a kind of serenity of the town itself, a sleepiness. I feared it because of my dad, his alcoholism. He had grown up in Brooklyn, New York, and after the war, World War II, he'd moved with my mom to this little prairie town in the middle of nowhere.
Why? What brought them from
My mom was from Minnesota, and was from southern Minnesota, and I think he was being nice to my mom. We'll go where you want to go. But he felt totally out of place there. He had dreams of being a writer himself that never came true. He ended up peddling life insurance out in farms all around the town, something he despised doing. He didn't like selling, period, but certainly didn't like going down lonely farm lanes, selling life insurance to people who didn't want it. And he began drinking and drinking and drinking. And by the time I was 10 years old or so, he was at the bottom. He couldn't go down. He's a town drunk. And did go into 2 institutions. And in the town itself, I felt evaluated. And by the people around me, it was kind of a standard Lutheran Scandinavian place of rectitude where drinking was terrible and it was a moral sin. I felt a rebuke all around me. Part of it maybe imagined, but part of it very real. And feared the place and came to hate the place by the time I graduated from high school for its insularity, its absolutism about how one should behave in the world. I didn't like it anymore. And so I have this love-hate thing that I'm a product of that town in some ways. So I revisited it. The place has changed completely since then. And
what's it called? What's it called?
Worthington, Minnesota. It was just the subject of a Washington Post major article about this little town where it's completely changed since my growing up there. Where when I lived there, it was 100% white. I say 100%, there was one Japanese family, and that was it. Now, more than 50% of the schools are filled with brown and black faces, which is remarkable. In all of America, there's only another town in Oklahoma that's more diverse than this place. There's a big meat packing plant in the town that attracts people from Laos and the Philippines, Latin America, and Africa. Relatives come and they bring other relatives. And now whites are in the minority in a place where before they were the only people who lived there. So there's great resentment in the town. When I revisited it, I talked to, old friends who just thought our place has gone to hell. I thought it was great for the town to sort of join the 20th century in the real world we're all living in. And as much as there's acrimony in the town, and will be for a while longer, just as there is in America as a whole about immigration, I'm an immigrant, you're an immigrant. For some way, we weren't, our ancestors, for the most part, weren't American Indians, and even they were immigrants,
right,
wherever they came from. So I think it's good for the place, but I do have a love-hate relationship with it. The town is aged, as I have. The face of the towns are, is brown now, and mine's changed. I'm not a young guy anymore. And what happened to the town has happened to me. And it was fun to revisit my youth.
When were you last there?
Oh, gosh, it was 7 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm not good at time anymore.
Yeah, right.
But something on the order of 5 years, I think. And it was spooky in a way. When you're standing in front of a house you grew up in and you don't want to knock on the door because somebody else is living in that house now. And so I parked outside and looked at it, and it was as if ghosts were all around me. Like on that lawn, there was my dad throwing a softball to me. I remember it was a softball because it was big. And memory is like 1 second long, but it's there. It's just a second. And a memory of a Christmas Eve inside the house, and my dad drunk, and Christmas Eve not being like Christmas Eve, more like being in the middle of a television horror show, like The Walking Dead or something. It was terrible. And then a soft and good memory. When my dad's sober, he was a great man. He was funny and intelligent, well-read. He was just a really nice guy. And those memories would come too. All that while parked in front of a house. And it taught me a lesson about writing and about myself, which is how in my own memory, things can coexist. Pain with great happiness, and laughter can coexist with sadness in my memories. And I tend, maybe like most of us, to come to a conclusion like it's all sad or it's all fun and happy, when most of what life has delivered to me has been a blend of all kinds of things.
Yeah, and I mean, and constantly changing.
Constantly.
It's good one moment, it's terrible the next. It's good one moment, that's my experience anyway. And I'm hopefully getting to a place where I'm like, okay, so this is how it is now. It'll change, it's always going to change some way or another. I mean,
yeah.
But you talk about your dad's problem with alcohol and how it was obviously a defining experience of your life. And a lot of it seems to have been born of the fact that he felt out of place, not only geographically, but also occupationally.
Right.
But you also talked about his military experience. Did he have a difficult service? You said Iwo Jima?
Well, it was very dangerous. He was on a destroyer at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and what happened to destroyers during those two campaigns. They were sunk left and right. Not all by kamikazes, but most. It was really dangerous. I'm sure he was scared out of his mind. But he never talked about it that way. He talked about it in kind of a Gene Kelly, Frank Sinatra, on the town, cheery, chipper. The clever, funny stuff would come out of his mouth when he told stories. He avoided, as a lot of veterans do, he avoided the nastiness and of memory. Maybe as a way of himself dealing with it, but I think more likely he didn't want to infect me and people around him with these bad memories. And so he kept it light. He actually wrote a few pieces called the Navy Sea Bag in Norfolk, Virginia. Little short, 12-inch pieces that were the Gene Kelly. I mean, it was just sort of chipper, and we kind of had a little joke around it to conclude a piece. Fun to read, very well written. He did feel out of place in the town. I think that goes for sure. Whether it caused his alcoholism, who knows? There are probably myriad causes behind it, and some of them unknown to me. And it probably is a little facile to say, well, it was just that he was out of place in the town. I think it was deeper than that. I think it was dreams that didn't come true, and he knew would not. A dream of being a writer, a dream of a kind of an idealized Brooklyn that he'd return to, of Coney Island and happiness and fitting in. I think that's more likely what happened. And then there's the simple chemical issue that alcohol is alcohol, and it can do things that are addictive, and it's now thought of as a disease, whereas back when I was a kid, it was thought of as a great moral failure on the part of my father. That's where the rebuke stuff came in. It's not thought of as it is today.
Yeah, it was like a weakness.
Yeah, moral weakness.
Mm-hmm. I see it as an allergy.
Yeah.
Like some people are just allergic to it.
It could be.
That's how it always strikes me. They have a reaction to it. And it's not great.
It certainly hits different people differently, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who struggled with alcohol. She would have one drink, okay, 2 drinks, and she would just go blank. Like her face would just go blank. It was the oddest thing. And I was like, something is happening differently inside of her than happens in most people.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your relationship to Worthington as it pertains to your service in Vietnam, because I didn't realize in reading, your book and reading about you, getting ready for the interview, I didn't realize the way the draft worked. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize that the town picked.
Most people don't realize that.
I had no idea.
Yeah, we have this mythology that the lottery was always present. It was just statistical. I mean, your number came up, your birthday, and that's how you were chosen. But that was instituted a year and a half or so after I was drafted. I was drafted by my hometown, Worthington. There was a thing called a draft board. They were all across America. Hometowns brought in maybe 6, 7, 8 citizens who would sit on the draft board, usually prominent bankers, owners of department stores, kind of the town's upper hierarchy or upper echelon in the hierarchy. And they'd make the decisions. There's that kid, and I know his dad, and I know his mom, and he's a good kid. Let's not draft him. And why I was selected, I really don't know. But it was done. I took it personally because it was personal. They chose my name. They didn't choose the name of my best friends, any of them. And to this day, I resent it because why not choose their own damn sons? Or why not go themselves and choose themselves? Some of them were young enough. And then to have this power of choice as to who's going to live and die, or maybe live and maybe die.
And have to kill.
Yeah, and have to kill people on top of it and carry that burden for the rest of your life. Try that one sometime. And they knew the whole town was like a know-nothing town. They couldn't have found Vietnam on a map. If you know those blank maps that they give in like 3rd grade,
right.
They couldn't show that. The history of the place, what's French nationalism or colonialism, what's nationalism, who's Bao Dai. They wouldn't be able to answer a simple 6th grade multiple choice question about the history of the place or American involvement in the war. So it was a level of power that wasn't commensurate with the weight of the decision. And that's what it's going to do to human lives. The lottery, at least, as much as we can laugh at it or deride it, at least has a sort of statistical fairness about it. And it's not, whoever the number falls on, you've got problems. Not that there weren't ways out of the problems. There were. You could get, deferments for bone spurs in your feet.
Right.
I'm not naming names.
Well, but it also strikes me as who would want the job of sitting on a draft board? That sounds hellish to me.
I would not.
I would not want to be picking people's kids out of a list to go over there and, be involved in that horror.
I would not either.
I mean, if there's got to be, I've always said, and I guess maybe there's an argument to be made that it would affect the ability of our nation to govern itself. But if there ever were going to be a war, there could only be a war if the children of age of politicians would be required to serve.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that help us guard against making irrational decisions?
It would certainly be a great law, wouldn't it? You can vote for a war. It's a free country, and you can speak in favor of it. But there's a law that says if you do so, you got to go, and so do your children if they're of age. Or at least you have to urge them to go, and we have to have a tape recording of it, something on that order. The alternative is you support a war to the extent only that other people will kill and die, but not you. And that's a strange construction to say, yeah, I'm all for, killing people over in Vietnam. But I'm not going to do it, nor are my kids. And I call that hypocrisy is not strong enough a word. I'm not sure what the strong enough word for it is. Cowardly, immoral, some word like that. And this is not a political issue. I mean, this is coming from way back in my history as a foot soldier over there in combat. And it wasn't just Tim O'Brien saying this stuff. It was everybody around me, all these people saying how great this war is. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There wasn't any. I almost said a bad word.
You
light
can.
At the end of the
say
tunnel.
Whatever you want.
There isn't any fucking light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah, it was black. And they're cheerleading for war from the safety of studios, wearing their bow ties and smiling at cameras and with pan makeup on. And well, if they're so for the war, why the hell aren't they in the war? And to this day, you can hear my voice gets louder, and I get more. The outrage comes out, but it's not a Democrat-Republican kind of thing. It's a moral human issue for me that if you're going to speak in behalf of killing people, you have to go beyond rhetoric and lip service and not just retired in the Packers game on TV that night and forget about what you'd said at the Rotary Club that day. And I talk this way to my kids. They have a tough childhood in some way where other fathers probably tell bedtime stories to their kids, and I do too, kind of cute ones about horny pigeons and farting teachers and that kind of stuff to make them laugh. I also talk this way to them. They'll say something that'll build me up to the point where I've got to try to let my outrage out and encourage them to look at the world around them, and if it requires it, show some outrage about the world. I'd love to bequeath them a life of outrage, because ultimately it's a life of morality. And without outrage now and then, I'm not sure how moral you can be in this world we live in. There's too much danger and bad stuff in the world. And
it demands a response.
Yeah, it demands some kind of a response.
So what about your boys serving in the military? How have you handled that? Like the possibility of it, or?
I can give you a couple of examples. One time, Timmy said to me, I guess he was like 11 or so, he said, so Dad, are you a pacifist? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, what if somebody broke into our house and tried to kill me? Well, what would you do? And I said, well, I'd try to talk to him first. And he said, yeah, but what if it's really a mean, nasty terrorist or burglar who's going to kill me? Would you kill him? And I went silent for a long time and finally said, yeah, probably. At least I'd try. And Timmy said, what kind of pacifist is that? And I said, father kind. It's an example of this absolutism thing that even about something I deeply value, of not killing people, it's a pretty good idea. It has an exception that I'm pretty sure that if somebody tried to kill my children, and I was certain that that would be happening without my doing something, I'd strike back. Well, that example, the problem with that example is that it's used oftentimes to justify wars, bad wars. They make a comparison between what, Stalin was doing here, and they say, well, that's like killing your children and so on. It can be misused in the political world as an example. But on the personal level, I think for me at least, it's pretty true. I do hate violence, but when it's threatened against my children, I'm probably capable of what other fathers might be capable of, striking back and trying to stop it. So when it comes to military service, I try to teach them through stories like that one, like that answer. Another example is this is one of these little YouTube memories in my head, like 10 seconds long. I was complaining to my wife about something that had come out of the TV set. I don't remember what it was, but it was not good. And I said, I was saying, God, my books have just failed so miserably that I thought I was a peace writer, and all these wars keep coming at me. And I said, the only book that would do the trick is one that shot off your nose when you opened it up, and then shot off your ears and shot off your tongue and your lips. And Tad overheard this, and he said, oh, I guess you shouldn't hold that book in your lap. And the fact that he was listening and he was catching up on the image, like he could see the image of a book opening and gunfire, is the only way. Maybe war isn't so great and so glamorous and so wonderful. He'd been paying attention to what I was saying about the nastiness of war, and what, through a book, would somehow try to replicate that so that people would feel how horrible it is and not be quite so blithely sending people off to die and kill. That story, to me, meant more in teaching than any lecture I could ever given. He was, abstract lecture because of the image in it. He imagined that book.
Well, and also, you weren't trying to deliver a lecture. You weren't trying to, it strikes me that sometimes we're most effective in communicating with our kids when we're not trying to harangue them with a lesson.
Absolutely. I try to avoid them at all costs. The story is always so much more specific and more powerful, more memorable than abstraction. Yeah.
So, you get selected to go off to Vietnam. Had a difficult war experience. You see a lot of things in war, I can only imagine, that stay with you for the rest of your life. And you then subsequently wrote several books that deal with this. Your new book deals with it too. You sort of can't not talk about it. It's part of who you are.
It is.
Can you talk about the act of writing creatively, be it fiction or nonfiction, and confronting this stuff on the page, and how it has or has not helped you emotionally, helped you mentally, get clarity on what war is and what happened to you. I imagine the trauma of war leaves you fractalized. Mm-hmm. And we talk about the slipperiness of memory. Mm-hmm. I can imagine how a person could spend the rest of their life being like, what the hell happened? What was that? Why did we do that? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, it endures, but it's not always present. That for vast swaths of my life, I go about grocery shopping and reading books and writing them, and not always about Vietnam. I like going to Vegas now and then and camping out at a blackjack table. I like celebrating New Year's Eve with my kids. I like playing golf. I don't do it much, but I like it when I do it. But every 3, 5, 10 days, something will bring back the trauma, just as it would for if you had breast cancer and you were a survivor. Something will deliver it to you back again, and it'll be present for a while. And it's happened often that at a dinner table, something will be said, just as our family's eating dinner. It'll bring it back. And I'll look down at my plate for a long time, and I'll go silent. My kids will notice. My wife will notice. And I'm not suffering exactly. I'm remembering something, or more exactly, trying to get a grip on what I remember, and usually failing. I was in combat. It wasn't like just being in Vietnam. It was killing people and watching people kill my friends. It was killing. And it was nonstop. There were no breaks from it. Even when there was a time of quiet, it was scary quiet, because you wonder, when is the next terrible thing going to happen? And all these minefields, we're just walking through them constantly, leg after leg, and dead people from landmines, and you couldn't shoot back at them. And that stuff endures to this day. When I'm walking, I'll look down at tarmac, or I'll look down on a sidewalk, and I'll remember that feeling of, where do you put your feet? Where do you put your feet? It's pure luck. You couldn't see these things. So it's little things like sidewalks will make me remember something, and it'll cause a reverie or a silence or an attempt to, in my head, remember more exactly than I can. And then it'll dissipate. It'll go away when Timmy says, play a game of Monopoly with me, anything. That's all it had, and it'll go away. But it doesn't vanish. And this is true more so, I think, for the mothers of dead soldiers and the fathers, how they can not forever be in pain. I just don't know how that. Once you're dead, you're dead. But to be the mother of a dead soldier, and the father of one, or the sister, brother, lover, or children of one, that seems to me almost unendurable. I can't imagine either of my boys dying,
Well, yeah. Or, any parent, that's the worst horror,
It's the worst.
And I think of the anonymity of the dead, especially the civilian dead in a place like Vietnam. Mm-hmm. I think that's referenced in one of your books, or I picked it up.
Referenced in the new one.
Yeah. And I was like, I hadn't given that thought. But to be caught up in the middle of a brutal war, to be trying to just live your life and raise your family, you're living in a village.
Yeah.
And then one day the planes fly in, or the soldiers come in, you die, and no one even knows.
Nobody even knows. Yeah.
That's it.
Your family, the war dead are mourned really only by those who had loved them, intimate love, mothers and fathers and girlfriends and wives and so on. The mourners, the rest of it falls into just a sort of a casualty count bag. 488 million human beings have died in war in the history of our planet, as an estimate. No one knows for sure, of course, but that's a pretty good estimate, and probably a really conservative estimate. And yet not only do we not know anything about all those 488 million dead people, we can't remember a damn thing about their wars. In fact, we don't even know the names of them. The Paraguayan War, the An-Lushan Rebellion, the Moorish Wars, wars of conquest by the Mongols, what they were about, what they were fighting over.
Right.
Who was right, who was wrong. Was anybody right or wrong? No idea. Just a whole bunch of dead people. And as you use the word anonymity, that's exactly the right word. But not only are the dead anonymous, the wars are anonymous. We don't know if there's a single objective fact about all those I just listed. Very few people do. Some historians may, but by and large we don't. And somehow we tolerate that. And without much sense of outrage or worrying about it. In the case of Vietnam, 3 million dead Vietnamese. And today, 50 years later, I'll visit high schools, and after I talk, some perplexed student will raise a hand and say, who won a war with 3 million dead people? And they don't know who won the war. And then I'll get another question. What was it about? Like the reasons behind the war, forgotten, containing communism and stopping dominoes from falling and stopping Ho Chi Minh from scampering through the streets of Seattle. You know, those kind of justification. I'm not exaggerating. That's a real justification by a political figure. And a whole bunch of others. It's totally forgotten. They're almost erased from memory. Because we have a new enemy that's been, you know, the terrorists. And that's our new enemy. And to think of all those dead people, no one can remember what the war was about. And imagine 150 years from now or 200 years from now, even that's going to recede. Everything I just said about dominoes, it'll be some little footnote. And only what remains really are the dead people and the people who love the dead people. So you can hear the pacifism coming out. It's part of the reason I wrote my new book. It's because I'm called a war writer. And what I thought I was doing for all these years of my career, I thought I was doing exactly the reverse. I thought I was writing books to show the nastiness and how terrible war is on an individual human level, how ludicrous it is, the absurdities of war through the stories I was trying to tell, the moral weight you have to carry home from a war and suffer for the rest of your life. I thought I was a peace writer. And in this book, I was determined people are gonna have to listen to what was in my heart as I wrote the other books. And it says, I think, a lot about the things they carried to have written Dad's Maybe book, in all kinds of ways. And some of them explicit ways, connecting other so-called war writing to my most fundamental values that I carry around as a human being. And, yeah.
Well, I think that may be just a shorthand for people because the books deal with soldiers in war theaters. But I will say in your defense and in defense of quote-unquote war literature that it does, to me, differentiate itself some from, say, war cinema, in that you're able to access the inner lives of the characters on the page and the experiences that they're going through and how they're processing them. One of the more indelible reading experiences I had in my life is reading that book, Jarhead. I don't know if you ever read that by Anthony Swafford.
I haven't, no.
But it was made into a film.
I know.
And one of the things that he talks about is how when he was on base, you know, in basic training or wherever he was stationed, that the soldiers would sit around and watch like Full Metal Jacket and these war films, and it was like to get themselves revved up. Mm-hmm. Whereas, you know, you talk to the directors of these films and they're always saying, you know, what we're trying to do is show the horrors of war in an unfiltered way so that people understand the reality. And I think that their intentions are sincere. But I guess what I'm getting at is that maybe literature is superior in trying to bring the truth home because of its interiority.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's superior to, I think, to film. Film, you're not thinking the thoughts of the characters. You're guessing at them through their behaviors and dialogue. But in a book, you actually get words like "he thought," and then you get the thought. So you do have a kind of deeper access in a book, I think, than in watching a film. The difficulties for me come in kind of what you just said. They come out of a writer can control only so much. You tell a story, you can control what happens in the story and what people say and do. But a reader coming into the story will come into it with religious values, cultural values, political values. They're going to kind of brush up against your story and will take from it oftentimes things that are completely unexpected. It's happened to me so much in my writing that I'll give a talk at a university or a city auditorium and I'll start choking up. I'm sad, and it's hard to do it. And then somebody comes up to me, usually a young man of like 22 or so, and says, I appreciate your honesty, and I knew that was tough going for you, but thank you for doing it. And then say, I've been thinking about joining the Marine Corps, and now I know I'm going to. It's happened a lot of times, 20 times. I mean, over and over it's happened. Sometimes kids are in uniform, ready to go off to Iraq or Afghanistan. And they'll say, thanks for doing that. It makes me want to get over there and do my service even more. And I'll go back to my hotel room and I'll look in the mirror and think, what a yo-yo I am, what a failure as a writer. But it's the writer's lot that you can't control responses to a book, and you shouldn't. That I think art is meant to invite someone into a moral participation in the events of the story, rooting for or against people. And what would I do? And what's the correct thing to do? Which are two different things. What would I do? And what's the right thing to do? But it's to invite that, but not to control the answers. And in that sense, it's a lot like being a father. You can't control. If you did try to control the behaviors of your own children, what they're going to do in the world and what they're going to become, that's a kind of tyranny that I don't want to exercise.
Me neither. I also don't want to be, I've talked about this recently, I don't want to be too hands-off. I struggle with that tension of like wanting to give my kids space to find their own way and to make up their own minds. But I also don't want to be so hands-off that it becomes a case of negligence.
Me too. That's exactly the line I'm walking with every single act of my life.
And I'm sure it gets a little bit more difficult as they get into adolescence, and then you're like, when do I intervene? What do I say here?
I just went through this last night. I did a gig here in L.A. And got home at 12 o'clock and called my wife and got her up at 2 a.m. and said, what happened today? And she said, oh, what a nightmare. She said, at the beginning of this trimester, way back in late August, Timmy, who's now a junior in high school, got an assignment in art. By the time the trimester is over, you have to develop at home and do an art project. And that project was building a mask that was organized around the principle of a nose and the other meaning of the word nose, K-N-O-W-S. Those two concepts, a physical nose on the face, and how do we know stuff? He knows he's something. And last night, she said, it was around 10 o'clock to me, so, dear God, I'm supposed to do this all trimester. I haven't even started it. I don't know what to do. And Meredith had to make this decision. How much should she help him at 10 o'clock for a project due the next day that's supposed to be elaborate? And at first she thought, well, I could do a lot to help and do it, but that would be doing it for him. And she almost went that way. But then she had this moment you were just talking about. You can't live your kid's life by doing the things they're supposed to do for them. And she had to back off as much as her instinct were to sort of protect your kid and help him, get this thing in. And then she reached what I thought was a sensible compromise, saying, look, I'm going to give you an idea. It's late. I would recommend you take my idea, but if you don't, you better come up with your own. And she said, I'll watch over you and make sure you do it. And that's all I'm going to do. I'll sit here and watch you. And if you need stuff like Scotch tape and putty and whatever you might need, paint, I'll give it to you. It's a good medium, but those things this is last night at midnight. I'm dealing with this, and I'm in L.A. I live like 1,000 miles away, and I'm still dealing with, and I did one thing. I sent Timmy a text message saying, I want you for sure to go tell your mom how lucky you are to have her as a mother. And he said, I'm not kidding. You have to do this. And I want you to use these words. Mom, how lucky I am to have you for a mother. Well, wake up this morning. He texted me back. I told her. This is at 2 a.m. now.
Right.
So I assumed, he told her. No, I wake up today. I asked Meredith, so I hear Timmy told you that he was really lucky to have you as a mother. And she said, No, he didn't. but even she's really unsure. That she said I know he came in there around 4:00. He came in and said something to me, but I don't think that's what he told me. So they are walking that line between negligence and sort of overbearing behavior. It's a constant one. But it's not just with children, it's with life in general, I think. It really, for me at least, it affects the way I do politically and just the way I live my life, that it's walking a balance and making a lot of guesses along the way.
Yeah. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on politics, but this seems like such a strange and fraught moment in American history. How are you processing all of this as somebody who has served the country and been to war and experienced the horrors of that? And, I think you would know as well as anyone that the people in power don't always have the best interests of the citizenry in mind. Like, how do you process Donald Trump and the moment that we're in?
Well, I come at it from a pretty strong viewpoint. I think the problem isn't Trump. The problem is our country elected Trump. We're at fault, not Trump. We knew what Trump was when we elected him. All you had to do was watch him stalking Hillary during the debates, being a bully and peering over her shoulder and flexing his macho muscles. And we elected this guy, despite what we heard on that taped bus conversation, the foul language he was using about women. It's not as if any of this was secret. Voted for anyway. My disgust is with the country that elected this guy. Granted, he didn't win the popular vote, but he did get elected, according to the constitutional methods of the Electoral College. So it's like hating Hitler and blaming Hitler for what happened in Nazi Germany, or Germans for letting Hitler happen, and buying into Lebensraum and buying into let's get the Rhineland back, and buying into anti-Semitism and buying into it, at least to the extent of silence, and I think way beyond silence. I think acquiescence is a more proper word. So it's not for me a political Republican Democrat thing. It's really, I feel saddened by my country for what it did, and choosing a man so conspicuously a narcissist and an egotist and a demagogue. And it was conspicuous. All you had to do was watch the video of that and many other episodes prior to his election. That's how I feel about it. This is why I decided to write this book, because I could say stuff like this. And in fact, it's real. I'm not trying to hide behind characters, and I'm not I'm allowed at this point to say some of the things I believe that went into my earlier work. A kind of anger, things like my hometown drafting me, and the arrogance of it, and anger at myself for doing something I shouldn't have done. I knew that war was wrong, and I went to it anyway because I was afraid to say no to my country, and I feared ridicule and censor. So it's not just me being arrogant about the world. I'm complicit in what I did, and I've been trying to make up for it for like 50 years now.
Well, I am a huge admirer of your work. I love this book.
Thank you.
It's been great to talk with you. I appreciate you making time during your swing through Los Angeles.
I appreciate the intelligence of your questions. I don't get it often, so thank you.
Okay, that was Tim O'Brien talking with me in episode 616 back in December of 2019. A great conversation. One of the truly special episodes of this program, and very happy to listen to it again. So I hope you enjoyed it. Read Tim O'Brien's work. If you haven't, you can start with The Things They Carried. You could start with Going After Cacciato, In the Lake of the Woods. You can't go wrong. He's still publishing. He wrote a novel not too long ago called America Fantastica. I think there was even something else since then. So he's still going, and he is one of our finest living writers, a true American treasure, and such an honor to have him here on the show. So that's it for today, Sunday. Don't forget to subscribe to this show. Follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my weekly newsletter over at Substack. Support the show at patreon.com/otherpplpod. Get yourself a deep dive course if you're a writer over at deepdive.audio. And if you have 2 minutes, please rate and review this show wherever you listen. Okay? New episode coming up on Tuesday. My guest is Kathleen Schmidt. And she and I are going to be having a conversation about the state of publishing in the United States right now and what needs to change. So stay tuned for that coming up on Tuesday. All right? We'll talk to you soon.